Oh, well, I want to touch on the hormone piece because hormones are also a hot topic right now. And I don't know if many people who are hearing all of the latest buzz about perimenopause and, menopause and all these things, how histamine plays a role in that. And so a lot of women get, over 35 and it's like, well, I'm having these skin rashes or breakouts, or I'm having irritable bladder. That's a big one too. Or, any of these issues that they think are not related to hormones could be related to hormones via histamine. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. So first of all, let me say, because you mentioned irritable bladder, right? That the synthesis of diamine oxidase to help protect tissue from too much histamine is not limited to the gut, right? We have those enzymes and that protective enzyme mechanism in a number of places throughout the body. And the bladder is also one of them, right? And actually in other places in the urinary tract, but also in the lungs and in the respiratory cavities. So where we have mucosa, we largely have the ability or not to produce diamine oxidase. And it's important to realize that people can have genetic impairment in the synthesis of diamine oxidase. And so sometimes people are starting off already with a predisposition to histamine overload, if you will. And this does make them more vulnerable to these types of symptoms and requires more awareness and support in reducing histamine load on a day over day basis because their ability to degrade it is lessened. Um, but the challenge here with hormones or sex hormones in particular, as you mentioned, has to do with the powerful roles of estrogen and progesterone in mediating histamine. And this is a critical part, like you well said, for many women's experience with, I'm going to say, perimenopause in particular, because most women don't realize that perimenopause is a really long window. It doesn't start when you begin to skip menstrual cycles, right?
Mhm.
For most women, it begins a full 5 to 10 years prior to menopause. So, to your point, late 30s, early 40s is right on track. And a huge mediator of those symptoms, like increased anxiety, trouble sleeping, insomnia, trouble, like you said, with skin histamine manifestations, maybe GI issues, maybe problems with migraines. We start to experience some of those often as the body begins to produce less and less progesterone each time it ovulates. So, counter to a lot of myths otherwise, estrogen doesn't begin to really notably change until quite late in perimenopause. But progesterone begins to slowly wind down many years before estrogen is affected at all. And both progesterone and estrogen change the synthesis and the expression of diamine oxidase. And when we have lower progesterone levels, we tend to produce less diamine oxidase. And therefore, we're more vulnerable to poor degradation of histamine. This also means that even younger women who have anovulatory dynamics like PCOS, or overt hypothalamic amenorrhea, right? Maybe if they're quite thin. They can struggle also with histamine mediated symptoms because if a woman is not ovulating, she is not making progesterone, the bulk of progesterone, right? The adrenals still make a tiny amount, but not very much. And when you're not making progesterone, it's somewhat logical to have challenges with histamine overload. And so, yes, for 5 to 10 years before menopause, we would expect to see a gradual progression of uh, histamine overload symptoms. And of course, alongside of that, when you have less progesterone, we tend to struggle with more estrogen overload as well, because estrogen and progesterone balance each other. And this is actually why, toward the end of perimenopause, like the final 4 or 5 years, is when women can experience some of the worst PMS or the heaviest menstrual bleeding that they've ever experienced.
Mm.
And that surprises a lot of women, because coming into menopause, they think, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be making less estrogen, right?
Mhm.
But the reality is, the later stages of perimenopause are not characterized by so much estrogen reduction as much as wildly fluctuating estrogen. And this also has an impact on diamine oxidase. And unfortunately, high estrogen states tend to promote more histamine. And so this becomes just sort of a histamine erratic time, because of the fluctuation of estrogen and the sort of steady downward progressive levels of progesterone. And so needing support for better histamine degradation and lessening exposure to histamine or development of histamine during perimenopause can bring women a lot of relief from some of the classic symptoms.
Yeah, I love the way that you broke that down. I think you broke down a lot of misconceptions there about that perimenopausal state. And I'm glad you touched on PCOS as well, because that's important to note.